All right, history students at Lewis Clark State College. Let's talk about chapter 11, and I'll provide you some kind of setup to help guide you through your readings. This particular chapter is entitled Raiders of Steppe and Sea, looking at the Vikings and the Mongols. And what we're really looking at here is one, this idea of a raider, um, and what that really is. People who survive based on making raids, and what that relationship is to civilization. So the barbarians and the civilized people, and that interaction that's going on in between them. So that's one thing we're looking at. But another thing that we're looking at here is the problem that we have with historical sources looking at peoples like the Vikings and the Mongols who don't write very much about themselves. And so it is written by other people who have a problem with them. And how do you read a source like that? So, whatever, you can think a little bit about it like, someone who comes over and tells you a story about how mistreated they were by someone else, and you're not really exactly sure how much of it is accurate and how much of it is anger and personal feelings and moral judgment. So that's the issue we're dealing with. Now, the setup on the chapter is a very familiar setup to you by now. We've got a primary source, that's a secondary source, that's our first document to give us some big context in terms of how to think about the rest of the documents. And then we've got 6 primary sources of varying levels of difficulty. Let's be honest about it, but they're pretty cool, and I'll get into that in just a second. So the first source is this piece by Gregory Guzman, Were the Barbarians a Negative or Positive Factor in Ancient and Medieval History? The title says it all. It is a beautiful article for understanding classic argumentative style. His thesis is in the title. His thesis is very clear within the first page. He goes point 1, point 2, point 3, conclusions, right? So what you need to be getting out of that is just follow along. Make sure that you're able to, outline his essay. Make sure you're able to break down the main points of the Guzman piece. Were the barbarians a positive or negative force in history? And when he's talking about barbarians, he's specifically talking about peoples of the steppes. Okay? So that and the classic peoples of the steppes are the Mongols, but there's others. But in the chapter, we got 2 different examples. And so on the one hand, we have the steppe peoples. That's going to be the Mongol documents. So that's documents 4, 5, 6, and 7. But first, we'll talk about sea peoples. What about raiders on the sea? Not from the steppes, but from Scandinavia. So let's look at the Vikings. So don't get too caught up in take Guzman's layout for kind of what causes the raids, what kinds of people these, barbarians are, but then conceptually see if you can apply it to the Vikings, right? See if you can apply it to the Vikings. All right, let's talk about the Viking sources. That's the first set of sources. Vikings are fun. We only have 2 sources from them, but that might be all we need, all right? The first source by Ibn Fadlan, this is document number 2, the Viking Rus. It's actually pretty crazy, and some of y'all might be semi-familiar with it because Michael Crichton's novel, The Eaters of the Dead, which became the movie The 13th Warrior, is very, very loosely, based on this. And when I mean loosely, I mean Antonio Banderas' character is Ibn Fadlan. And he does run into a group of Vikings. And there is a scene early in the movie that more or less kind of follows along with this primary source in which he witnesses a funeral. And then once you get into the monster fights and all that, it's a fun movie, but it's not historical. So here's the thing. Ibn Fadlan is from Baghdad, and he is sent north as an emissary to try to make contact with another Islamic kingdom because they have an enemy in between them and they want to try to form some kind of an alliance. And on his way, he runs into a group of people who, actually we really aren't sure who they are. Um, but most historians think that he runs into a group of Northmen, group of Vikings, who are way south on the Volga River. And so we have a Muslim describing the Vikings. So kind of keep that dynamic in mind to try to understand why Ibn Fadlan describes these people the way he does. How much of it is this is really the way they are, because part of it is. And how much of it is, let's be honest, Ibn Fadlan's kind of a he's kind of a straight-laced guy, and he's got straight-laced values and he's not sure about some of this. So that's part of it. But another part of it that is important to keep in mind is that he gives us an account of something that we don't have other accounts of. He witnesses the funeral of a Viking chieftain. And it's done old school style. And he describes what happens. And it is a really interesting way, funerals, really interesting way of looking at other people's cultures. What do they believe? What are their values? What kinds of things are happening here? But then you have to keep in mind, it's all being filtered through Ibn Fadlan. So check that source out. Read it slow. It's weird. It's not hard. It's weird. Read it slow, and then try to hold back your own moral judgment and see if you can think about, well, what would this mean? Like if I were a Viking at this time, what would this stuff maybe mean to me? What kind of insights can we get into Viking religion through this source? So that's thing number one. Thing number two, or document number two, is Eric's saga. And in this particular case, we're talking about Eric the Red, right? Maybe the most famous of the Vikings. You might not know anything about him, but you might know the name. And it's written in classic Icelandic saga style, kind of a poetic form. So be prepared for that. And read it slowly. Don't get caught up in the names or the places too much, like the specifics. This is one of those documents where they give you a lot of details, but maybe you don't need them because someone who was there might want to know exactly where these things are, but you might not. But what you want to do is you want to follow the story. What's up? Why is Eric continually moving? And what does Viking law look like? What does Viking justice look like? What looks like a thing that could get you killed? What looks like a thing that could cause a feud? What does Viking political organization look like? Those are the kinds of things you can get from this document. So just look for it on those fronts, all right? So those are your two Viking documents, number 2 and 3. And then documents 4 through 7 are various levels of complicated in terms of looking at Mongol stuff. I really suggest you read these things one at a time. Take a break. Read one, chill out. Read the next one, chill out. Read the next one. The piece by Yova of Narbona is a Christian. We actually don't really know much more about him other than this, who runs in to a group of Mongols in Hungary. And they have a Christian, it's not even really clear whether he's captive or whether he's there willingly. So there's two stories in here. There's the story that Yivo is telling about what these people are like that he's encountered. And then there's Yivo telling the story that gets told to him about what the people are like. So all you're doing in this document is what does Mongol culture look like? What kinds of things does he say they have? What kinds of things does he say they can do? What kinds of things does he say are interesting to them? So that's and then look out for the judgment stuff. Okay, the next piece, the secret history of the Mongols. I love this piece. It is a Mongol piece from a Mongol point of view. And what you're reading about here is a war between different steppe tribes. So keep in mind that the Mongols are a small group of people on the steppes, and they've been pushed around by all the others. They're sort of the poorest of the poor, and of all the people to rise up and unify the tribes, the Mongols would probably be the last you would expect it to do. And in the document, they talk about another group known as the Naiman. And this is Mongol versus Naiman. And what does steppe warfare look like? What does steppe culture look like? What kind of insults do they hurl at each other? What are the issues going on here? And how do the alliances form? So you can get an idea here about Mongol politics and how those kinds of things work. And for those of y'all who are interested in military history stuff, there's really cool stuff in this document. What kind of tactics are they using? Ibn al-Athir, you guys came into contact with him already in chapter 10. He's a historian of the Crusades from the Muslim point of view. He's also a historian of the Mongols from the Muslim point of view. What does this guy have to say about the Mongols? Easy enough. And then finally, John of Plano Carpini. He's sent on a diplomatic mission, and he goes all across Asia to a Mongol court. And while he's there, there is the ceremony to install a new Khan. What's he say it's like being there? What are these people like? And you can get like really cool descriptions of a Mongol camp from him. So don't overlook the fact that Caparini talks about what this camp looks like and what kind of, fabric the tents are made out of. He wouldn't say something like that if it didn't strike him as something interesting. What kind of gifts are they given? What kind of food are they offered? So you can get an insight into Mongol culture this way, keeping in mind, again, it's being, filtered through this European Christian. Now, get to the documents. They're pretty cool. Again, take these things slow, that if you're able to, because some of this stuff takes a little bit of time to process. They're not the fastest documents. Think about how you're going to use them, and I'll see you on campus.